Today we're going to be making the fluffy rainbow pony. Now you can see that this one has smaller holes along the back of the neck and also a small one on the back end, and these are for the mane and the tail. So first we're going to stitch up the big holes that are all over the body. When you open up your package, you'll find that you have a bunch of different colors of yarn and they're already cut. So you can decide what color you want to start with. I think I'll start with pink. Come to the end of your piece of yarn and find your stitcher tool. Now, it looks like this yarn is not going to fit through the hole of your stitcher tool, but it will. You just need to be really careful. Hold it over top of the hole and with a tool of some sort, carefully poke the yarn in the hole. And you can poke it a bunch of times until the ends all seem like they're poked in there. Feel free to ask someone else for help if this is hard for you. You should be really careful with it. There, and you can just pull it in. Leave a little bit off one side and then the rest of the length of yarn out the other side. Grab your pony and we'll start. Pick a hole, pull your yarn through the hole till you come to the end of the yarn, and then just carefully with a finger or your thumb, hold that in place. And then make a few more stitches. You want to pull the yarn so it's not too tight, but just lays flat against the wood. Yeah, like that. Once you've made a few more stitches, you'll be able to let go of that little tail of yarn that you started off with, and it'll just get stitched into all the rest and it'll stay in place. You can go ahead and stitch in whatever holes you want. You can make a pattern if you want to. You can kind of make a flower pattern with these holes here. Or you could, if it goes around the leg, just pull it off. You can position your yarn stitches however you want. Make sure the back is going nice and flat as well. But be careful not to pull your yarn too tight. You can do stripes if you want. You can do polka dots if you want. I'm just gonna kind of go all over the place with my yarn and put a bunch of different colors everywhere. If you find it hard to poke your needle through the back, you can just turn it over and turn it over again and poke your needle in and turn it over again, just like that. Now, I think I'm going to start with another color, but I'm not going to cut this off. I'm just going to pull the rest of the yarn off the stitching tool and I'm going to leave it hanging out the back. Now I've got this pretty blue color threaded and I'm just pulling a few stitches on while I hold the end. And you can go in the same holes over and over. You can go across the holes if you want. However you want to do it. I'm going to put a bunch of blue. I'm going to put some purple in. Purple at the back here and kind of overlap the colors until most of the body is covered. You can see I have most of the body covered. There's still a few spots showing, but I've left all the tail ends of my different colors hanging off. So all I have to do is thread that long end back onto my stitching tool, just by carefully poking it through the hole. Remember to ask for help if you need. And now I'm just going to use the rest of this piece of pink to fill in some of these gaps I've got. You can always sort of see where your holes are by where a colored stitch ends. And even if you can't see the hole anymore, if you just poke your tool in there, it will poke right through the yarn. See? And go into that spot. I'm almost to the end of my yarn. So let me show you what to do when you get to the end. Let's flip it over to the other side. Now carefully take the tip of your tool. This might be a little bit tricky, so you can ask for help if you need to. I'm going to poke my tool underneath some of the stitches I've already made. And you can use your finger to pull the stitches up a little bit if you need to, but I'm pushing that tool It's right against the wood, and I'm going underneath of a bunch of stitches. And then I'm just going to pull it through, and it's going to pull that extra piece of yarn underneath those stitches. And if an end comes loose, you can just use your stitching tool to poke it into a hole. Poke it under another stitch. And there's another little loose end. I'm just going to poke it in this hole. And anytime you're playing with your pony, you can fix ends like that. See here, there's still a few bits of wood showing, even though I've got all my yarn used up. But that is fine, because if you just pinch your stitches gently, you can stretch the yarn apart. You go like sideways against a stitch and really carefully pinch the edges of the stitch. Look at that. Look at how fluffy each little stitch of yarn can get. I think I'm going to do this all over and make my pony really, really fluffy and curly and chubby looking. You just gently pull that yarn apart and fluff it up and poke in any ends that come out, just stretching each stitch just like that. You don't want to get too rough or else you will pull the yarn right apart, but now let's do the mane and the tail. You've left these holes open. So I'm going to get another color of yarn. Let's use this nice peachy color. This is going to be the tail. So I'm going to thread my stitching tool again by carefully poking the end of my yarn through the hole. And this time I'm going to pull it all the way so it's almost even. So the stitching tool is right in the middle of the piece of yarn, and I'm going to poke it in the hole at the back end, the tail hole, and I'm only going to pull it until I have 4 long pieces of yarn all sticking out, kind of pretty close to the same length. And I'm going to tie those in a knot. And you can ask a grown-up for help with this if you're not sure how to tie a knot. Make that knot nice and snug. And see how the ends are all hanging out? And there's my stitching tool hanging off the end of the loop. I'm going to take some scissors and just cut the ends all off so they're about the same length, which is how long I want the tail to be. And it still doesn't look very good, so I'm going to carefully pull apart all of these yarn fibers. This yarn is made from some real sheep's wool fibers and also some other kinds of fibers, and it's all raveled together to make a fat piece of yarn. So when you pull those fibers apart, it gets really, really, really soft and fluffy. And you can do this as much as you want, but if you do it too much, you'll start pulling the fibers right off at the tail. So if that happens, you can pull the loose fibers away or trim them off with scissors if you want. Let's do the mane now. I'm going to get some yellow yarn. And this is almost the same as doing the tail, except I'm going to use some shorter pieces. So you can cut the pieces shorter ahead of time if you want to, but I'm going to leave mine long and I will show you why. So I'm going to poke my stitching tool through the first hole, and I'm going to pull the yarn almost all the way through until I just have a short piece. And then I'm going to tie that in a knot around the back of the neck. So cross the yarn over and then behind and under and pull it tight. Now I'm going to cut my yarn off so that both those pieces are the same length. And you'll see I still have yarn on my stitching tool, so I can do the same thing again. Poke it through the hole, pull it almost all the way through until I have a short piece close to the same length as the other pieces. Tie that in a knot around the back of the neck by crossing the short end over, behind, and under, and pull it tight. nice and tight. You can also put a little drop of glue there when you're all done if you're worried about the yarn coming off later. And I'm going to trim this piece again so that both the ends are about the same length. I'm going to do the same thing for these last 3 holes on the neck. Just pulling a piece through, tie a knot at the back of the neck, and then trim the yarn off. And since I'm using one big long piece, I don't ever have to thread my stitching tool again, which makes the job a little bit faster. But don't forget, you don't have to do your whole craft in one day. You can stitch on it a little bit one day and a little bit another day. Now that I have all the yarns tied through, I'm going to pull the fibers apart a little bit, just like we did with the tail. And it's going to make a really pretty, fluffy mane. I really like this color. You can smooth it down. You can kind of make it lay where you want to because the yarn is pretty soft, but if you find it's really standing up funny and you don't like it, you can give it a little bit of a spritz with water and hold it down, or even spritz it a little bit with water and hold it down and wrap a little bit of tape around it until the water dries, and then it'll lay flat. But I like mine fluffy and poofy like this. This piece of the mane is actually called the forelock, that's in front of the ears, and I feel like it's a little bit too long. If this was a real pony, it would be covering her eyes up. So I think I'm gonna trim it off a little bit shorter. Just grab my scissors. Don't forget, if you trim your pony's hair, you can't make it grow again, so be really careful if you decide to trim any of its hair. But I like that a lot better. And then the rest of the mane is just nice and fluffy. Fluff it up as much as I want. Like that. This rainbow pony unicorn is so much fun to make. And now that she's all done, I can keep her for decoration in my bedroom, or I can play with her. There's a few little loose ends here, so I'm gonna just tuck those under that stitch. Anytime you need to, you can find your stitching tool and poke loose ends in. But I hope you had fun with your unicorn pony too. See you next time.